Chapter 9, Part 2. You better not forget it, she said. It was easier to be nasty when she couldn't feel his reaction. It might be bad for your health. Don't worry, he told her briefly. I can take care of myself. And you better believe I'll never forget. The thread was so fine and taut that Jazz couldn't hardly sense it now. She felt an odd lurch inside her, a pleading, but she knew what needed to be done. I do what I want to, for my own reasons, she said, and nobody questions me. I'm leader, remember? Snap. It was a physical sensation, the feeling of breaking away as Morgan was carried off on a wave of his own black anger. He was retreating from her so fast that it made her dizzy, and then her eyes were open, and she was in her own body. Jazz blinked, trying to focus on the room. She was looking up at the ceiling, and everything was too bright and too large and too fuzzy. Morgan's arms were around her, and her throat was arched back, still exposed. Every nerve was quivering. Then suddenly the arms around her let go and she fell. She landed on her back, still blinking, trying to gather herself and figure out which muscles moved what. Her throat stung, and she could feel dampness there. She was giddy. What's wrong with you? Get up and get out, Morgan snarled. Jazz focused on him. He looked very tall from her upside down vantage point. His green eyes were as cold as chips of gemstone. Then she realized what was wrong. You took too much blood, you jerk. She tried to put her usual acidity into the words to cover up her weakness. It was just supposed to be a ritual thing, but you lost control. I should have known you would. Something flickered in Morgan's eyes, but then his mouth hardened. Tough, he said shortly. You shouldn't have given me the chance. I won't make the same mistake again. She struggled to a sitting position, trying not to show the effort it cost her. The problem, again, was that she wasn't a vampire. She couldn't recover as quickly from loss of blood, but Morgan didn't know that. Not that he'd care anyway. Part of her winced at that, tried to argue, but Jazz brushed it aside. She needed all her strength and every wall she could build if she was going to get past what had happened. It shouldn't have happened, whatever it had been. It had been so horrible mistake, and she was lucky to have gotten away with her life. And from now on, the only thing to do was try to forget it. I probably should tell you why I'm here, she said, and got to her feet without a discernible wobble. I forgot to mention it before. Why you came back? I don't even want to know. He only wanted her to leave. She could tell that from his posture, from the tense way he was pacing. You will when I tell you. She didn't have the energy to yell at him the way she wanted. She couldn't afford the luxury of going with her emotions. Why do you always think you know what I want? He snapped, his back to her. Okay, be like that. You probably wouldn't appreciate the chance anyway. Morgan roared. He glared at her in a way that meant he could think of too many nasty things to say to settle on one. Finally, he just said almost inaudibly, what chance? I didn't come back just to take over the game. I want to do things with it. I want to make us more powerful. In the old days, the idea would have made him grin, but a wicked spark put a wicked sparkle in his eyes. They'd always agreed on power, if nothing else. Now he just stood there. He stared at her. His expression changed slowly from cold fury to suspicion to dawning insight. His green eyes narrowed, then widened. He let out his breath, and then he threw back his head and laughed, and laughed, and laughed. Jazz said nothing, just watched him, inconspicuously testing her balance and feeling relieved that she could stand without fainting. At last, though she couldn't stand the sound of that laughing anymore, there was very little humor in it. Want to share the joke? It's just, of course, I should have known. Maybe I did know underneath. He was still chuckling. but it was a vicious noise, and his eyes were distant and full of something like hatred, maybe self hatred, certainly bitterness. Jazz felt a chill. There's only one thing that could have brought you back, and I should have realized that from the instant you turned up. It wasn't concerned for anybody here. It's got nothing to do with the gang. He looked at her straight in the face. Looked her straight in the face. His lips curved in a perfect malevolent smile. He had never been more handsome or more cold. I know what it is, Jazz Redfern. I know exactly why you're here today. The end of chapter 9, part 2. I would like to thank everyone for coming out to T. Lore and Counsel. I hope that you all come back again on tomorrow evening for the next chapters of Huntress. The next chapters that will be told is chapter 10, 11, and 12. Please join us again. Thank you for coming.